Ladies and gentlemen, history is often written by what survived, but tonight we focus on what did not. In the archives of the United States military and intelligence agencies lie recordings never meant for public ears, crackling radio transmissions, grainy cockpit footage, helmet cams frozen on a final frame. These are the sounds and images of missions that did not end with victory parades or official briefings, but with silence. During World War II, American pilots flying deep into enemy territory relied on radio contact as their lifeline. Some transmissions still exist today, voices calm, professional, reporting routine details. Then, without warning, the signal breaks. Static replaces speech. No mayday, no final report. Just an empty frequency where a voice once was. In the Cold War, silence became even more unsettling. Reconnaissance aircraft and covert ground teams operated in places where denial was policy. When a mission failed, the recording often ended abruptly. Footage cutting to black, audio tapes marked only with a date and a code. Official statements would later describe loss of contact. Nothing more. One of the most haunting aspects of these recordings is their normality. The voices are not panicked. The footage does not always show chaos. In many cases, the final moments sound ordinary, almost boring. That is what makes the silence afterward so powerful. Something happened, but history never heard the explanation. For decades, much of this material remained classified, not because it proved failure, but because it revealed vulnerability. These recordings showed that even the most advanced military in the world could lose people, machines, and entire missions without answers. When fragments were finally declassified, they didn't provide closure. Instead, they raised deeper questions. Why was recovery never attempted? Why were families given so little information? And what did the final seconds truly capture before the signal was gone? These audios and images are not just evidence. They are witnesses. They remind us that behind every operation code name was a human voice, someone who believed they would be heard again. In American military history, silence is never empty. It is filled with risk, secrecy, and sacrifice. And sometimes, the loudest truth is the moment when the recording stops. Because some missions didn't end in failure or success, they ended in silence. Throughout American military history, the last transmissions of certain missions have become some of the most haunting records ever preserved. These are not dramatic speeches or final goodbyes meant for history. They're routine check-ins, calm status updates, and ordinary operational chatter that suddenly stop. In many cases, the voices captured in these recordings had no idea they were speaking their final words. That is what gives these transmissions their enduring power. During World War II, U.S. pilots flying long-range bombing and reconnaissance missions depended entirely on radio communication. The technology was fragile, vulnerable to weather, enemy interference, and mechanical failure. Many surviving audio logs begin with confidence. Crews reported altitude, fuel levels, and visual landmarks exactly as trained. Then the tone would change, sometimes subtly, sometimes not at all, before the transmission cut off. No distress call followed. No confirmation of landing or rescue was ever received. The official record would later list the aircraft as missing in action, but the audio would remain, frozen in time at the moment contact was lost. These last transmissions were often reviewed repeatedly by intelligence officers and commanding staff. Every word, every pause, every burst of static was analyzed. Did the pilot sound tense? Was there an unexplained background noise? Did the signal weaken gradually or end instantly? Despite careful study, many recordings offered no clear answers. The final moments sounded normal, which made the silence afterward even more disturbing. A routine mission on paper ended without explanation. As technology advanced, so did the ways these moments were recorded. By the Korean War and later during the Cold War, audio was often paired with limited visual footage. Cockpit cameras, surveillance equipment, and helmet-mounted devices captured fragments of missions that would never be completed. In several documented cases, footage shows steady flight, stable instruments, and clear skies, until the image freezes or abruptly cuts to black. The accompanying audio might include a brief acknowledgement from the pilot or operator, followed by nothing at all. These recordings challenged assumptions about danger. Not every mission ended with alarms or explosions. Some ended quietly, almost invisibly. This forced military planners to confront an uncomfortable reality. Not all losses announced themselves. Sometimes there is no warning, no sign of failure, only the absence of a voice that was expected to report back. During covert operations, the importance of final transmissions became even greater. Special reconnaissance teams operating behind enemy lines were trained to send short, coded audio updates at specific intervals. When a scheduled transmission failed to arrive, command units waited, sometimes for hours, sometimes for days. Tapes from these operations often contained the last successful message, brief, controlled, and deliberately unemotional. After that, there is only silence. In many cases, the mission itself was never officially acknowledged, and the recordings were locked away under strict classification. For families, these last transmissions became symbols of unresolved loss. While they rarely heard the recordings themselves, they were often told that contact was lost. That phrase, repeated across decades, concealed the emotional weight of what those final seconds represented. Somewhere, a voice spoke into a microphone believing someone was listening, and then the connection vanished forever. The Cold War intensified the secrecy surrounding these recordings. Reconnaissance flights near hostile borders, surveillance missions over open oceans, and intelligence gathering operations in denied territory produced vast amounts of audio data. When a mission ended in silence, the recordings were carefully archived. In some cases, they were edited, partially erased, or marked with vague annotations. The absence of a clear ending was not just a mystery, it was a political risk. Acknowledging what happened could escalate tensions or expose capabilities the United States preferred to keep hidden. Yet, even within classified environments, these last transmissions left a mark. Analysts who listened to them described the experience as unsettling. The calm professionalism of the voices contrasted sharply with the unknown fate that followed. There was no dramatic final line, no cinematic closure. Just a routine sentence that, unknowingly, became the last record of a mission. When fragments of these recordings were eventually declassified, they did not provide neat conclusions. Instead, they revealed how often history relies on incomplete evidence. The public heard voices without endings, saw footage without outcomes. These materials did not explain what went wrong. They simply confirmed that something happened beyond the reach of the record. The power of these last transmissions lies in their authenticity. They were not created for history books or documentaries. They were operational tools, meant to be overwritten, reused, or forgotten once a mission was complete. That they survived at all is often accidental. And because they were never intended to tell a story, they tell one more honestly than any official report ever could. In American military history, these recordings serve as reminders of uncertainty. They show that even with planning, technology, and discipline, missions can disappear without explanation. The silence that follows a final transmission is not empty. It is filled with unanswered questions, human vulnerability, and the limits of control. The voices captured in these moments continue to speak across time, not through what they say, but through what they never got the chance to finish. Throughout the history of the United States military and intelligence operations, much of what occurred has been shrouded in secrecy. Entire missions, some successful, some not, were never meant to be known by the public. Yet among these, there's a particular type of silence, one created not by the loss of life or failure of equipment, but by deliberate classification. In these cases, recordings, footage, and reports were intentionally withheld, sealed, or redacted, leaving only fragments behind and leaving questions that may never be answered. This is the story of that classified silence. From the earliest days of aerial reconnaissance and intelligence gathering, the military recognized that not all information could be shared. During World War II, pilots and crews on deep penetration missions would carry cameras, microphones, and coded communication devices. Many of these missions were documented for military archives, but the recordings were often deemed too sensitive for release. They contained more than operational data. They contained proof of vulnerability, evidence of unknown enemy capability, and glimpses of the people executing dangerous tasks. If these recordings were made public, they could compromise ongoing operations or provide adversaries with insight into tactics and technology. The very act of preservation for internal use became an act of concealment. The Cold War only deepened this culture of secrecy. Aerial reconnaissance, submarine patrols, and covert operations behind enemy lines produced a wealth of material. Every radio transmission, every surveillance tape, and every cockpit camera recording was reviewed, logged, and often classified at the highest level. In many cases, footage showing a mission's final moments that ended abruptly or inexplicably, was intentionally buried in secure archives. Analysts were instructed to treat these recordings as sensitive, not just because they revealed technical information, but because they revealed human behavior under extreme circumstances. The world was never supposed to see the anxiety, the hesitation, or the split-second decisions that unfolded in silence. For decades, families of personnel involved in such missions received vague reports. The term loss of contact became a common euphemism in official statements. Behind that phrase lay hours of audio and video that documented the last known actions of soldiers, pilots, and operatives. Some of these recordings were remarkably detailed, capturing routine chatter, instructions, or observations in real time. Yet the public record contained almost nothing. The silence imposed by classification meant that the reality of the mission, the uncertainty, the danger, the human element, was invisible. Those who were lost became abstract figures in official histories, while their recorded voices remained locked in drawers or on tapes hidden in archives. The process of classification itself added layers of complexity. Some audio tapes were partially erased or redacted, leaving only fragments that hinted at what might have occurred. Visual footage was often marked with codes and kept from the public eye for decades. The result was a patchwork record, moments captured in extraordinary detail, followed by gaps where silence reigned. Analysts, historians, and eventually journalists encountering these materials faced the challenge of interpreting what was never meant to be interpreted. Every static burst, every abrupt cut, every missing segment became a symbol of the controlled narrative, what the public could know versus what remained hidden. This silence was not only protective, it was strategic. By controlling access to the recordings and footage, the military could manage perception and prevent sensitive information from influencing geopolitics. During reconnaissance operations over hostile territory, for example, a lost mission could have exposed weaknesses if audio and video evidence were available publicly. In intelligence operations, the absence of recordings or the deliberate redaction of images preserved deniability. The very gaps became a tool, reinforcing the idea that some operations were beyond scrutiny, beyond accountability, beyond public understanding. Yet, classified silence carried its own psychological weight. For those within the military, listening to recordings of missions that ended abruptly, or reviewing footage that froze mid-action, was a reminder of risk and responsibility. These materials contained no narrative closure. They offered no neat explanation, no heroic conclusion. Analysts and decision-makers were left with incomplete fragments, forced to infer what had happened, and to plan future operations in the face of uncertainty. The silence imposed by classification mirrored the uncertainty inherent in the missions themselves. It became a form of operational memory, preserved, protected, but never complete. When some of these recordings were eventually declassified, the impact was profound. The public could finally hear the voices of operatives and pilots in their final known moments, see the footage of missions that had vanished from official accounts, and witness the precision, professionalism, and calm that often preceded the unknown. Even then, the silence remained. Declassified tapes rarely offered complete narratives. Redactions, cuts, and missing segments preserved the mystery. The human story, what the individuals were thinking, what they saw, what they hoped, remained largely inaccessible. The classified silence had done its job, to protect, to obscure, and to preserve uncertainty. This phenomenon raises a broader question about history itself. How much of what we know is filtered through the lens of secrecy? How many voices were silenced not by failure, but by policy, by necessity, by the limits of what a nation could reveal? The recordings that survive the classification process are extraordinary not just because they document events, but because they show the edges of what was deliberately hidden. They offer a glimpse into a world where silence was as much a part of operational procedure as strategy or training. And in that silence, the human experience of risk, uncertainty, and duty is preserved in its rawest form. Classified silence, then, is both absence and presence. It is the unspoken narrative that exists behind official reports. It is the acknowledgement that some stories cannot be fully told, that some missions end without public acknowledgement, and that some moments captured in audio or on film are never meant to be fully understood. The weight of these silent recordings endures, reminding historians, military personnel, and the public that even the most meticulous record-keeping cannot capture every truth. Some voices end in silence, not because they were unheard, but because history decided they could not yet be told. And so, the legacy of classified missions lives on in this tension between what was recorded, what was preserved, and what remains hidden. The silence imposed by classification is not emptiness. It is intentional, deliberate, and filled with meaning. In that silence, the echoes of human action, decision, and sacrifice continue to resonate, leaving us with questions that may never be answered and a history that is always, at least in part, unfinished. Even when missions vanish from public memory, when crews are lost and official records remain sparse, the audio and footage they leave behind continue to speak. These remnants, sometimes a crackling radio transmission, sometimes a blurred camera image, are echoes of events that ended without resolution. They do not provide a tidy narrative, nor do they confirm success or failure, yet they endure, preserving moments that would otherwise disappear entirely from history. In this sense, these recordings are more than documentation. They are witnesses. Consider the final radio logs of pilots lost over hostile territory. The transmissions often appear mundane, a confirmation of altitude, a check-in on fuel status, a brief acknowledgement of orders. Yet these ordinary moments acquire extraordinary weight because they are the last known expressions of human action in dangerous conditions. When the signal cuts out, it leaves a void, a silence that is audible, almost palpable in historical records. Listeners can imagine what followed: the sudden malfunction, the unexpected enemy encounter, or the final moments of calm before catastrophe. The audio becomes a bridge between presence and absence, a thread connecting us to events that no longer have witnesses beyond the recording itself. Visual footage captures this same tension. Cameras mounted on aircraft, naval vessels, or helmets on reconnaissance teams often stop mid-action. One moment, an operator is performing routine maneuvers. The next, the screen freezes, the film ends, or the image fades into darkness. These fragments tell us very little about the outcome, yet they preserve the reality of the mission. Historians and analysts can see instruments, gestures, landscapes, and timing, but the most critical moments are missing, and that absence becomes meaningful. The echo of what could have been is as powerful as what is visible. The footage allows us to witness not resolution, but the potential for it, to feel the tension of a story cut short. These echoes do more than inform, they humanize. Beyond strategic calculations and operational metrics, audio and visual remnants reveal people at work under extraordinary circumstances. The calm professionalism in a pilot's voice, the precise motions captured on film, the brief interaction between team members, all of this communicates human behavior, thought processes, and discipline. In many cases, the recordings convey emotions that official reports cannot: fatigue, focus, confidence, or subtle concern. Even if the mission ends in silence, the recordings preserve the lived experience of those involved. They become testaments to courage and routine alike, bridging the gap between the past and present. The enduring impact of these echoes is also cultural. They shape our understanding of history in ways that dry statistics cannot. A missing aircraft listed in official records is a number. A final transmission of that aircraft, however, transforms it into a story. The voices captured in audio and the fleeting frames of film give context and texture. They remind us that behind every operational failure or classified mission were human beings performing dangerous work under conditions most of us will never encounter. In that sense, the recordings become historical artifacts, not just for researchers, but for the public imagination. Technological progress has amplified the ability of these echoes to endure. Digitization allows old tapes and film reels to be preserved, restored, and analyzed decades after they were recorded. Audio distortions, static, and low resolution, once obstacles, are now seen as part of the historical record. Each crackle, each visual grain, adds authenticity. These imperfections are not flaws. They are reminders that we are hearing the genuine traces of events that unfolded under conditions of risk, secrecy, and imperfection. In listening and viewing, we participate in a dialogue across time, mediated by these echoes. Some echoes are particularly haunting because of their ordinariness. A pilot's calm voice discussing altitude or fuel may seem routine, almost banal, yet the same voice that is perfectly normal in the moment becomes a haunting marker of loss when contact is never reestablished. Similarly, footage of operators performing standard procedures gains emotional weight when we know those images represent the final moments of a mission. The juxtaposition of normalcy and sudden absence creates a resonance that no written report can capture. History is not only what happens, but what is left behind in fragments. In a broader sense, these echoes challenge our understanding of closure. Missions that ended in silence defy the human desire for resolution. The audio and footage provide only partial stories, leaving gaps that cannot be filled. Yet that very incompleteness makes the echoes more powerful. They remind us that history is often partial, contingent, and fragmentary. Not every question has an answer, not every outcome is known, and not every mission is fully recorded. The traces that remain become both evidence and enigma, prompting reflection, speculation, and deeper inquiry. These echoes also serve as warnings. They remind military planners, historians, and civilians alike that even meticulously planned missions carry inherent uncertainty. They document what is known, and by implication, what is unknowable. A transmission cut short, a camera frozen, or a recording that ends unexpectedly is a stark reminder that human experience cannot be fully controlled or predicted. Even in technologically advanced operations, chance, error, and circumstance leave traces that are beyond management or interpretation. The surviving audio and footage therefore become both historical record and cautionary tale. Finally, the echoes that remain preserve memory in its most visceral form. They allow us to hear and see what would otherwise vanish, to encounter reality without mediation, and to confront the human cost of missions that ended quietly. They are enduring witnesses to events that have no final report, no official narrative, and no closure. In their fragments, we find continuity with the past, a connection to voices and images that speak across decades, reminding us that history is not only written in archives and statistics, but also in the reverberations of what was captured, preserved, and never forgotten. In the end, these echoes are a testament to presence amid absence, to reality amid uncertainty, and to the persistence of memory even when events themselves vanish. The audio and footage left behind by missions that ended in silence remain more than just recordings. They are voices frozen in time, eyes that glimpsed the edge of human endeavor, and traces of events that history has not fully explained. They remind us that even when silence follows, something enduring survives, the echo of what once was, demanding to be heard.